In this lesson, I'm going to show you what may be one of the most important creative compositional tools available inside of Photoshop, and that's layer masks. So what we have here right now is we have two layers on top of each other. We have the blue top layer, and then if I hide this, you'll see underneath we have the yellow bottom layer. So we can show this layer underneath by simply hiding this, or we can take the top one and adjust the opacity. If we take the opacity down to 0, then the bottom will show, and then we can change the amount of opacity. We can blend the two together. Well, this is great if we want to work with one layer completely separate than the other one without doing any local adjustments. But what happens if we want to have, say, one part of this image where they're both blending and other parts they're not? Or we would just want to punch a hole in here. Well, there's a couple of ways we could punch a hole. Is if I just grab a selection tool and I grab an oval, for example, and then just hit delete. That would do it. Another way we could do it is to grab the eraser tool, the almighty eraser, and let's make it a little bigger, and I could just begin to paint with this eraser, and I could also allow the layer underneath to show through. So let me hide the bottom. The problem with this is that we now have a hole. We've just done the digital equivalent of grabbing a pair of scissors and cutting a hole out of the middle of your photograph. It's not something you want to do. It's very hard to reverse this. And also, if we close out this document and reopen it, there's no way to reverse it. It's gone. It's permanently removed these pixels. So we don't want to do that. So let's just undo this a couple of times. And let's look at a better way of doing this. So here we are with our layer on there. What we're going to do now is we're going to select a layer mask. With the layer selected, go down, click on the mask, and you'll now see a mask next to it. The mask will appear white by default. A white mask has no effect on that layer. So what it does is it just sits there, and it's now ready for us to interact with this layer. If we want to cut out this layer, what we need to do is put some black on this mask. And where we put the black on the mask will cut through and enable the layer underneath to show. To demonstrate, let me grab my brush. And we're going to set the foreground color right now for black. Now I'm going to go up under the brushes. I'm just going to do a hard edge selection just to make things very, very easy to see what's happening. So let's make sure our opacity is turned all the way up. And we've got black, and then if I attach it here and I draw across here with that black brush, it's painting out the background and allowing it to show through. Well, let's have a look and see how this works. If I hit the Alt key or the Option key, I can click on the mask there and I can see, hey, here's the mask I painted with black. Where it's black, it cuts out the top photo. Now I can do the same thing. I can hit the Alt or Option key and click to turn the mask back on, or just click on the layer. Now if you click on the layer, be aware the layer is selected, because if I go to apply the black brush now or the white brush, I'm going to be painting directly onto the layer, and that's destructive. We don't want to do that. So let me just undo that. Make sure you select the layer mask, and then once the layer mask is selected, now I can paint away this layer. So as you can see there, the black will actually cut it out. So here's the thing. What makes this different? If I hide the background here, what makes this different in the eraser? Well, what makes it different in the eraser is the mask I can paint backwards and forwards. It's very easy to paint, as you can see, blacks and whites on there, versus trying to reproduce this pattern or whatever the information is, typically be on top of a photo. So if we go on here and now I decide to do the opposite and I paint with white, remembering that white has no effect on the layer, but black does. So with white, we're actually restoring that layer now by painting back with white. So you can see the kind of control it can give you working with the black and the white. So there we go. And of course, the fastest way to do that would be to just fill this with the foreground color, which is white. So if we did have it kind of cut out, let me just do that, and we'll turn that back layer back on again. The fastest way to fill it is to just hit the Control key and backspace, and it would be Command backspace on Mac, and that will fill it with white, and that just resets this entire mask. Now let's look at one other thing here. I'm just going to paint with the black again, And as I said before, one of the great things about this is it might look similar, but if we hold down the Shift key and click on that mask, we can turn that mask on or off. We can also get rid of the mask just by clicking, and let's turn it on first. Let me just Control Z that. We're going to turn it on. And I can click it to the trash, or this will ask me now, do I want to apply or delete it? If I apply the mask, that will permanently leave this cut out. If I delete the mask, it'll throw it away and put this back to how it was. Notice you can't see anything, but if I turn the background on, we can see it right there, back where we started. So let's create a new mask. And this time I'm going to show you something else. Okay, so apart from the fact it's non-destructive, this is definitely a really good positive. There's another thing you can do with the mask which really makes it super powerful, way more powerful than the eraser tool here, is if we go in here with our mask and we decide to set up our brushes, we can set up pressure sensitivity for our brushes, or we can adjust the opacity. If you're working on a mouse, you could bring this down to around about 30% or 33% approximately. And if you want to get an exact amount, you just tap the number. So if I hit 3, that'll take me to 30. If I want 33, just tap 3 twice very quickly, and we'll get 30%. So while you've got the brush going, it's very easy to set that opacity just by tapping. If I want 50%, just tap the 5, and you can see that it changes the opacity of the brush. So if I've got this brush set to 50% opacity and I paint on the mask with a black brush, what happens now is I'm painting this out at 50%. If I hit it 30%, now what it does is it only hides it by 30%. If I hit a 9, it will hide it by 90%. And you can see, based on how much opacity we have here, this is going to enable us to blend the two layers together. So we're not necessarily just cutting one out, we're allowing the other one to show through. And let me hit the Alt key or the Option key to show you. So you can see how this works is with different shades of gray. So a black will cut all the way out. 50% gray will give you 50%. So we don't necessarily have to do the opacity of the brush. Let me just turn this back on. There's another way we can do that. And in fact, let me just reset that there. What I can do too is if I'm working on a brush and I don't want to change the brush opacity for whatever reason, I can go down and I can change the shade of gray. So if we look at this right now, the 100% black is going to cut out. But I can change it here. And if you want to know the exact value, look over here on the B. This is the brightness. This is hue, saturation, brightness. So if I pull that up to around 50 there, that's going to give me an exact 50% gray. Or I could do 60%. I can type the numbers directly into the brightness value here and click OK. And what that does is it gives me a different shade of gray. And now if I paint with this shade of gray, it'll give me that amount of opacity. So you can see how that shade of gray is directly proportional to the transparency. So, we could do it by changing the gray there, and there'll be times when you want to do that. And then there's other times where you just want to change the opacity. The opacity is pretty quick because we can just hit the 5 for 50% opacity. But the other thing we can do is if you have a pressure sensitive Wacom tablet, turn your opacity all the way up and you can turn on your pressure sensitivity from here. Now make sure on your brushes panel, when we turn that on and off, that the transfer mode here is set to pen pressure. It's showing no pen because it doesn't see the pen. Now I put the pen by the tablet, it's going to show that pen now, and we're using pen pressure. So that means I can press hard or I can press gently. And let me create a softer edge brush here. And I can start to paint and blend these layers together creatively. And this is definitely the way to do it. And let's have a look on the mask again. If we look on the mask, you can see where I've been blending this in with my brush. So you can see how we can start to work backwards and forwards with the two layers. Okay, well now that we know that black completely cuts out and white completely reveals this top layer, and 50% gray will cut it out 50, or 30% will cut it out 30. So we know those shades of gray are proportional. Let's use this to our advantage to create a smooth blend between the layers. So to do this, we grab our gradient tool. Make sure we hit the D to reset the foreground and background colors to black and white respectively. So the D key will do that, D for default. Go up here. The first option is foreground to background. We're selecting a linear gradient. And now we can just click and drag on here and notice it creates the smooth gradient there, which enables us to blend these images together nicely. Cool thing about this is it's non-destructive, so we can do it in all different ways, just dragging in different directions. So here's the thing. If you do a drag over a large area, you're going to get a slow, soft transition. If you use a shorter area, you're going to get a more abrupt transition. So one of the great things about this is I'll use this for blending photographs together to create seamless composites. But once you've applied the gradient, you can also touch it up by grabbing the brush tool, and we could paint in some areas here and just gently blend these areas together. So you can do some fine-tuning by hand. So this is one of the great things about using the masks. As you can see, they're very, very powerful. Apart from the fact they're non-destructive, they give you a lot of control. Well, there's other things we can do with these masks too. Let me just fill this one with white again. And one of the other things we can do here with the masks there, apart from filling them with white like I did there, you can also fill them with black. And if I fill this mask with black, it hides the contents of that layer. So if I just want to have a little bit of on there and paint on that layer, I can set this to black and then just go in and paint on my image where I want that layer to appear. And it will only appear where I've painted. So let me just undo that again. So one of the other ways we can do this too is, I can fill this with Option Backspace. What we're doing there, that just kind of fills that white because that was a foreground color. One of the other things you can do if you want to invert that mask is just double click. The masks panel will pop open. Go down and you can click invert, and I'll change the mask to black, or invert it or change it back to white. Or even quicker, Control I or Command I on the Mac. So Control I will invert. So you can very quickly invert that mask. The cool thing about inverting the mask is if we paint on these areas and you actually wanted the opposite, you can invert that mask, Control I, and you can see how you can switch that around. So that gives you another extra layer of creativity. So I'm just going to fill that again. So here's the thing about masks too. They don't just apply on layers. You can apply them to any layer you want, but you can also add them with adjustments. So if we do an adjustment, say hue saturation adjustment layer, you'll see here's our hue saturation. We can change the hue, and you'll notice something that looks like a mask, and that's because it is a mask. So if I choose that mask and I paint with black, notice how I can paint out that adjustment. So right there, I've taken that adjustment and I'm painting that out. So it's hiding certain areas and allowing that to blend together with the layer underneath. Now we can combine masks. If I choose the layer underneath, I can also mask this out. So you can have multiple masks on top of each other, and it's quite common to do that. Now if we hide the hue saturation, you'll see that looks normal. Turning it on can make it look very strange. But when you apply an adjustment layer, sometimes it's a great idea to take that and invert that adjustment. And I'm going to hide that adjustment layer entirely. And so we're not seeing that adjustment. And now if I get the white, I can just paint that adjustment on where I want that color to enhance, maybe around those edges. And you can see how we now have that control. I know I'm using images, but throughout this training, we're going to be using these masks with photographs, and then you're going to see how it works. But I think when you see the top and the bottom, it makes it very, very clear. So there you go. That's the basics of how layer masks work. Let me show you one other thing with the masks. When you go to remove a mask, let me just hide that. I'm just going to go to the trash can there, and you have the option to apply or delete. If I apply it, it will cut that hole, make it permanent. If I hit delete, it'll throw away that mask and just preserve that layer back how it was before. So there you go. There's layer masks inside of Photoshop.